Hey everybody, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me this evening. A little later than usual, but I think it's going to be worth it. Wanted to make sure this happened because I thought this would be a very interesting interview. I have a guest this evening who has a very interesting background, has a lot of experience that I think you guys will find valuable. Andrew Kloster is a attorney. He's also got a lot of experience kind of in and around the Washington bureaucracy. He's been general counsel in a number of different positions. He's worked in a number of federal offices, and so I thought it would be interesting to talk to someone. I talk a lot about the bureaucracy and that kind of thing here, but I thought it would be very interesting to speak with someone who has a lot of personal experience with kind of the nuts and bolts of how this worked and kind of pick his brain. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I apologize a little bit for there might be some ambient noise. I'm kind of downtown in DC, but thanks for having me.
No, absolutely. I mean, I guess if we're gonna have somebody with some real world experience getting live from downtown DC makes sense. I want to get into a bunch of different subjects with you, but I always start kind of the same way with my guests. So was wondering, how did you get started? I'm guessing most people aren't like, man, I really hope one day I grow up to be a bureaucrat. Was politics something you were always interested in? Was that a natural evolution of after getting a law degree? How did you end up kind of in this field?
Well, I mean, I went to college looking to go into into botany, basically, but I then started taking a number of philosophy courses, and didn't know what I wanted to do, and went to law school sort of on a lark, and then in law school, it was like Obama years, early Obama years. I realized that I kind of wanted to do politics, and when I graduated, it was 2010 out of law school, out of NYU. It was the Tea Party movement, and I thought politics would be a good thing to go into. And out of interest and out of a kind of civic duty, and I've been in nonprofits and government ever since. I've had several opportunities to sort of go into the private sector, into firms and things, and make a lot of money or whatever. And I've just sort of never done it, never pulled that trigger, and pretty happy with what I've done now. So yeah, it was kind of out of a sense of civic mindedness, and sort of, I guess I'm kind of a classic, martyr complex type of person, and yeah, so I went to work for several nonprofits. I started my career at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, FIRE. I was their sex assault guy. On the defense side, the April 4th, 2011 Dear Colleague letter had just come out, which dealt with Title IX processes for men accused of sexual assault on college campuses. And I went to the Heritage Foundation after that, and I clerked on the Seventh Circuit, went to the Trump White House, and elsewhere, a couple different agencies. So I've kind of bopped around.
I think you should definitely use the sex assault guy as your bullet point on your CV. Like, make sure that that's the
The man,
headliner there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, like you said, you'd been involved with the Trump White House. You held, it sounded like a couple different positions there. Gonna have a lot of different questions surrounding that, but can you start with just kind of the basics? What drew you into that? Obviously, like you said, you had a background in working in kind of these different spheres, but did you know someone? Did you have a contact? Did you get a call from a
Yeah.
recruiter? Like, what? How did that work?
So a couple of things, and I guess I would just say that my general advice for people is to everything is about incentives and increasing your upside risk and decreasing your downside risk. In relationships and jobs and life and everything. And I took a number of calculated risks. So why did I go to work at FIRE out of law school? Because I was like, it was the quote unquote libertarian moment, and Obama was in the White House, and I thought to myself, people on the right, we're going to lose everything forever. So the best thing we can do is make arguments about due process and sort of, please, give us some rights, within the sort of classical liberal framework. Trump changed all that in 2012. So right out of college, I'd worked briefly for Newt Gingrich. I supported him in 2012. When he dropped out, I supported Trump because I saw that coalition incoming. And when I was at Heritage during the 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, when Trump started running, I was the only supportive person in the entire Heritage building with like 300 employees or whatever. It was Rubio people, Cruz people, and me supporting Trump. And the point was because I kind of saw the populist sort of coalition incoming. I was, in some ways very online or whatever. And I was supportive. I was supportive early on. So it was kind of a sense of where the American people were. My dad, worked for the railroad, so I come from a, sort of pan Midwest background. Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, elsewhere, and family all across the Midwest. And I kind of feel like I got where the energy was coming from. It's hard to say it was me personally, but I was very lucky, and so I went to a couple places, thought that there was a libertarian moment when that changed, and I saw we had better opportunities under Trump, that we could actually win on the issues. I was very, very supportive. So I came back into the admin. I had been connected to the Federalist Society, so I looked for different groups where I could kind of network pretty well. And I was brought back into the Trump admin at the Department of Transportation in the General Counsel's office by Jeff Rosen, who later would be the acting General Counsel. So I've kind of been in the right place in the right time a couple different times. It's hard to say anything was myself personally. It's just, there are different, and I apologize for the noise. There are different, there were different movements and different currents and things, and just kind of trying to keep my finger on the pulse. I think Trump tapped into a lot of stuff in 2016. I was excited about it, and it was great. And, when he won, I was prohibited because I was clerking at the time in the U.S. courts. I was prohibited from campaigning, but when he won, I was so excited and very happy, and I'd been supportive, and one of my co-clerks was, working for Don McGahn. I knew other people, and I came back to D.C. for the Federalist Society convention. It was great. It was like a week or two after the 2016 election, and then there I was at this event that I'd been to many, many years in the past, seeing all these lawyers running around who 2 weeks earlier were saying how bad Trump was, were trying to look for a job. People like Sarah Isgur Flores, and other people. And we were kind of laughing in 2016, like, oh, they don't know who to talk to. We're in the corner, like in the meme, like they don't realize we're connected to the Trump campaign. And but the joke was on us because, pretty quickly these grifters and people that were super anti-Trump and never Trump very quickly came back in and were able to get these positions. So it was highly disappointing. And then, I served my term. I went into DOT in part to learn as much as I could from the biggest and most expensive regulatory docket in the U.S. I was an administrative law person. That's still kind of my passion, kind of learning how regulations are made. And then I kind of left in disgust a little bit, went to the Scalia Law School, but some people saw my exit. And those people who saw my exit back in 2020 or back in 2018 rehired me in 2020 when Johnny McIntyre took over the personnel office in the White House. So they saw me kind of quietly quit in protest over how stuff was being handled. And so I got rehired in 2020, and I was there at the personnel office, where I stayed, basically until the end of the admin, and I ended as handling the White House stuff and as the acting general counsel at USOPM, and then kind of approving, kind of the person who sort of replaced me, kind of approving his decisions and things like that at the back end. So I've had a very good run. A lot of it was luck. Some was being in the right place at the right time. And hope to impart some of that.
So I don't know what happened because your mic was very clear at the beginning, and then the last time you came in there, it was kind of bumping and fuzzy. So I'm not sure. I know you're moving around at the moment. So sorry, guys. We're trying to make this happen, even though Andrew got delayed. So the audio might be a little off. He's doing the best he can there, but I don't know if anything changed for you, Andrew. But if you have an opportunity,
Sorry
if
about
there,
that.
yeah, no problem. Like I said, I don't know. Sometimes like if it moves from earpiece to phone or something, it might so just something if you have an opportunity to check.
Yep.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you because it sounds like frustration was a big part of that, and of course we heard a lot of this, right? And every White House has this to some degree, right? There's always some kind of internal process story about how the administration, it can't keep staffers, or people in the bureaucracy aren't working with it, and that's why things are working. Of course, the Biden administration is now going through their own version of this, where Biden says one thing, and then the federal agencies and his staff basically have to come back and clean up his statements and redo everything because what he's saying is unacceptable or crazy in many places. We know that's a dynamic that exists in many different administrations. But a big thing, of course, a lot of people were saying, specifically with Trump and the execution of what he wanted to get done, his vision, the vision of the people around him, was fighting that bureaucracy at every turn. And it sounds like you were saying a lot of people who weren't really interested in what Trump was doing or what his initial push was kind of got involved, and they were hired on, and that changed the direction, slowed things down. A couple different questions related to that. Is that something that was unique to Trump and his leadership style and the way things are set up, or is that something every uh, right wing, Republican president should expect? And if that's the case, is there a way to avoid this? Or is this just a built-in function of the bureaucracy as it exists right now? Is there any way that you can avoid that mistake in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's precisely what I work on. I think the answer is Trump, since Nixon was probably the first genuinely right wing president. He wasn't uniformly right wing, but he had certain right wing instincts. Now, with Trump, with Nixon, recall, we had Watergate, um, which was a sort of minor affair that got blown out of proportion, became a cause célèbre. We had a number of prosecutions that, if you read Jeff Shepard's book, The Real Watergate Scandal, you'll notice that the swamp sort of communicated in unlawful ways to kind of take Nixon down. If Nixon had known at the back end what the issues were at the front end, he would not have resigned. Certainly, even today, it was kind of an injustice what happened to him. So since Nixon, I don't think we had a genuinely right-wing president on any number of issues. Trump was that president. And they ginned up, certainly the swamp, the establishment, the military-industrial complex ginned up a number of issues, including the Russia hoax, the P tapes, things like that. Totally fake. We know now they're fake. So I do think, it was unique to him in many respects. Now, could things have been done better? The answer is absolutely yes. I think we made blunder after blunder. And I think many people that are in Trump's orbit are very concerned about getting things right for the next go round, if there is a next go round. The American people gave a very clear mandate in 2016, and that was unique. It was unexpected. And in 2020, I took my time out from the White House to volunteer. I went to Wisconsin, went to Green Bay. I ended up helping run the Wisconsin election investigation for Justice Gableman after that. But I thought to myself, wow, 2016, we won, and we had nothing in our corner. In 2020, everything sucks. We've got COVID. He's wildly unpopular in certain issues. The left is unified. But the one thing we have is that the GOP establishment will get it right. They'll know that he can win, and they'll support us. They'll support us with get out the vote efforts and a real apparatus that they didn't have in 2016, and I was wrong. So I think people in Trump's orbit now realize that the GOP, the RNC, a lot of these people or in organizations are not terribly helpful, and that we need to be preparing ourselves for a fight in 2024. There's a lot that can be done for the bureaucracy. It's hard to describe what you mean by bureaucracy. There are many different theories about that. I think we sort of have a permanent expert class that has been delegated a lot of authority. You know, the separation of powers that you learn about in high school or whatever is not necessarily accurate. We have administrative agencies that kind of make decisions, that have delegated authority and independent quote unquote expertise and appropriations and money and delegations that they can kind of run without any inputs by Congress or anybody else. You know, the hiring and firing is difficult. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot going on. We have a number of different new initiatives and nonprofits and groups and things that are trying to help build that farm team so that we can do a better job in the future, but it's difficult. So that's kind of, it's a bad place to end, but you know, we understand the issues. I think a lot of people understand the issues, and I think there are many people that are trying to help plan for a better approach in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad for sure that it seems like there's a small but at least a dedicated like cadre of people now who understand the functional problem and kind of how deep that rot goes, and kind of more would be necessary. I think uh again, you know, this is all from the outside, but it seems like in a lot of ways the Trump administration kind of blew in there not really have expecting to want to win and not knowing kind of what to do now that they had caught the car. And
Right.
just and like you said, they expected, you know, the GOP to get on board and all these different foundations and NGOs. They thought that okay, well now obviously, you know, Trump's in the driver's seat and these people are going to want to rally around him and solidify power behind him. And that very clearly wasn't the case. So you're not just taking on one party, you're taking on both parties, and you're taking on basically the entire machine politics of DC. So you need, I guess, and I well, actually, we have a super chat here that I think just is a great question, so I'll just go straight to it. Pete Budapest for $10. Thank you very much, sir. He says, uncomfortable question. Do we even have a pipeline of people who could competently circulate into a right wing civil service, even if we had a genuine hard reset / regime change? And I think that's a really important question, because even if someone like Trump could go in there and really clean house and kind of dismantle, you know, these agencies that are currently huge encumbrances to big change, and could retake some of that initiative and stop turning all that power over to the expert class, do you even have the people to staff up? Because I think one of the big problems, this is something I've asserted, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you have very few people who come out of, you know, higher education and through, you know, NGOs and all these other organizations who maintain an actual right wing outlook and are actually interested in changing things. The ones that are most able to step into those positions of the technocracy are those who are either already left wing or are very comfortably controlled opposition. You have very few people, I think, in those highly specific and technical positions who are committed to the type of thing you're talking about.
Right.
How would a 2024 Trump administration approach that? Because that's a huge issue. You technically have to fill these offices, even if you plan to eventually dismantle them. What do you do with that problem?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and it's literally right down the middle of the plate for me, because that's sort of what I do all day now, and it's what I did in the last White House. I can name probably 6 organizations off the top of my head that are trying to move into this space. I've helped recently set up a C3 that's working directly in this space. Part of the reason I'm outside right now is I was at a meeting all day. I'm not going to, it was off the record, so I'm not going to be quite honest as far as what it was, but we're talking about trying to do the same thing in the sort of restraining foreign policy space, kind of more on the Doug McGregor side, less on the Mike Pompeo side. The answer is there are many, the movement, the quote unquote movement, the DC establishment does have a right flank that is aware of this issue and is working on it. So I can give you one organization that I really like off the top of my head that I work with a lot, which is the American Moment, which is a C3 that's trying to set up training and staffing at a junior level and a mid-career level for people that are aligned with Trump sort of America First agenda on trade, foreign policy, and immigration. So that's the American Moment. That's Saurabh Sharma, Nick Solheim, Jake Mercier, and they're very, very good. And we're going to win on the Republican side. We're going to win the Congress, probably the Senate and the House in the fall. That's going to mean 1,000 new jobs on the right. And this organization is certainly doing a lot of good work. And I have no self-interest here. I'm not on their board. I'm not paid by them. In terms of helping set the pipeline to staff with people that are, aligned on this sort of populist side of things. So that's one organization. I can give you 5 others, but I'll give you a couple right now. I know that certainly the Heritage Foundation is starting to move in this space as well. Their new president, Kevin Roberts, is very good. I've talked with him a lot. They're trying to kind of help do a transition and pipeline as well. They hired my liaison at the Office of Personnel Management, who later was the chief of staff there, Paul Dans, to head their transition project. Paul is great. And so certainly they're going to be hiring people that are, not as, neocon-y, not as open borders, not as, free trade, and trying to help staff as well. The third organization is AFPI with Brooke Rollins. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they do, but they're looking at doing staffing. And then, like I said, we just set up a C3 that I'm not quite equipped to talk about so much. It'll be, at some point I'll talk about it, but I think it'll be best positioned to help on this front. And then finally, the campaign itself. I certainly continue to talk with, I apologize for the noise. The campaign itself will be handling these things. So I think that there are multiple organizations that are handling the staffing right now. I'll let you ask a question because there's an ambulance.
No, we're just enjoying the subtle lull of sirens, in the evening through DC. Yeah, so I'm glad, like you said, that a number of different organizations are starting to understand that problem. I guess here's the thing that I'm worried about, and I'm sure there's just, like you said, there's only so much you can talk about in certain areas. So I understand that. I'm not asking you to go into anything that you can't be more specific about. But I guess one of the big concerns I have is I see a lot of it's the best way to say this, Dinesh D'Souzying,
Right.
which is a lot of neocon guys who were more than happy to light up the right wing on their way in, start to make kind of MAGA noises,
Yeah, it's the grifting problem. I understand it completely. And how do you keep them out?
Yeah, especially, no offense, with people like the Heritage Foundation, which
no, I completely agree. So I was the point of, because I'd worked at Heritage for 4 years, and I was at the personnel office as their lawyer, and I was so I'm communicating with a woman named Bridget Wagner, who was the coalition's director at the time at Heritage, and I was getting recommendations, and they'd say, here's some here's 10 resumes or whatever. And by the way, we completely shit the bed on greatagain.gov, which was, having people from across the country apply cold, send their resume in, and we try to hire them. We completely shit the bed on that. It was terrible. It was terrible. Didn't use it. It was on ice, and then finally in the last year when I get in there, I look through there and I see all these great lawyers and stuff, and I call someone up. They're like, "We haven't been called for 4 years or whatever," and donors and things too. But anyway, so I'm talking with Bridget Wagner at Heritage, and you're right. I mean, like she kept recommending these recommendations from, he's still at Heritage. This gentleman James Carafano, who's quite a neocon. And I'd say, look, we simply cannot hire your trade people. We simply cannot hire your foreign policy people. You have a very thin bench on immigration, but at least they're somewhat aligned when they're there. So, like, please stop sending us junk. Don't send us your foreign policy people. Send us better. I think they're improving on that. So I hope they continue to improve on that. There are a number of people I like there. I like Kara Frederick as well. I was the next door office to Hans von Spakovsky for 4 years when I was there in their legal center. So there are good people in the building. And I think, again, Kevin and Wesley and Paul Dans are doing, better work. But how do you stop the grifters? The answer is you need an ecosystem and incentives. We've got a much better situation. I mean, we have Claremont is out there pushing. We've got, Coke is actually pretty good on the war issue. Heritage is moving. We've got the Conservative Partnership Institute, which does very good work. American Moment. There are a lot of good organizations out there that I think are pushing into the more America First side of things. And it will just take a large coalition because, I mean, here's the fundamental point. On the transitions, there are a bunch of people get in a room and they each try to hash out who are the personnel and what are the policies for these different agencies. In the absence of strong direction from a presidential campaign, the lobbyists tend to win. I've read all these books. I'm probably the only person who's read these transition books for, lawyers and other people. You'd get the Federalist Society recommending some people. You'd get different people recommending nominees for different positions. I think we're going to have an overflowing wealth of organizations all trying to claim the Trump mantle. And yeah, they're trying to make money on it. I mean, AFPI, these different orgs, they're trying to grift on it, make a lot of money. But the end result is going to be a number of nonprofits that are going to produce, including Heritage, full books of policies and recommendations that anybody, whether it's DeSantis or Trump or anybody else in 2024, can look at and make better educated decisions, which is not something we had in 2016. In 2016, it was, recycled Romney executive order books and personnel books, recommendations from the American Petroleum Institute, things like that. So I think we're definitely doing better. Is it going to be perfect? No. But I think the right wing needs to be like Ann Coulter, help the Overton window by pushing the right flank. We will support you, whether it's Trump or DeSantis or whomever, we'll support you, but only if you guarantee us that we'll get good things in exchange. And if you don't guarantee that, we're not going to support you. I think there's a lot that can be done. I'm definitely generally optimistic, but I, more than anybody else, have been black-pilled and in the belly of the beast and have seen how bad it can get. So we're trying. There's a lot of money sloshing around. There's going to be mistakes. There are always mistakes, but I'm more optimistic than I was before.
Yeah, I will say this. I think that the Jeb Bush era of the Republican Party is kind of over.
Oh, yeah.
I that is the one silver lining. I don't have a lot of faith in the GOP at all, but I will say that the good news is that I think that the taste for that kind of politics is dead on the right when it comes to the voting base, and a lot of these organizations were very slow to move in that direction. But I think it's very clear for anyone who is up and coming that this is not where the energy is going to be. They're not just going to go back to this kind of safe neocon pocket and keep their voter base. I think that does mean that they're going to do a lot of half measures. There's going to be a lot of trying to throw a little bit of red meat and then run back to the center on a lot of stuff. Of course, that's just politics in general, but I think we're going to see a lot of this as they renegotiate those policy positions. I can't I'll be honest, I can't help but feel like I'm hearing echoes of the Bernie wing of the Democrats. We're gonna harass these people until they make them, the mainstream do what we want them to do of the party. This sounds a lot like the AOCs and stuff. And again, not an attack on you. I think that there's not a lot of good answers to the question, but I just worry a lot about, like you said, there's a lot of money sloshing around. The people who are ultimately going to control the outlines of these policies are going to be people who are fundamentally trying to draw the administration away from, those more right wing positions, those right wing populist positions. And so that's going to be a very uphill battle, and everybody has to go into it eyes wide open. Of course, there's a couple guys like you and some of the organizations you're talking about who are ready for that fight. But I think there's still many who are pretty ready to return to those comfortable positions as soon as any of the heat lets up. So I'm hoping that we do see we do see that they have to respect the voter base enough to at least move in that general direction, even if they don't stay there.
We're already seeing that. I mean, literally today on the foreign policy stuff, I was talking with folks, and the concern was, look, we were very optimistic under Trump. I had promoted a number of people to be like Will Ruger to be nominated to be the ambo to Afghanistan, and Doug McGregor and other folks. On the kind of not isolationist but more restrained side of the foreign policy issues and America first kind of foreign policy. And discussing with people today, the concern was, look, Ukraine happened, it was perfect, it was tailor-made for the neocons. We kind of all feel like, oh, they're going to get a win, and the win is they're going to somehow intervene and say, look, this shows that the America First position is wrong. And then you look at the aid package and things like that. And McConnell is a savvy operator, and he doesn't stick his neck out. He's a turtle, right? He doesn't stick his neck out. But he did stick his neck out on the Ukraine thing, and he's whipping votes, and he's laying his credibility on the line to make sure that his caucus is voting for this incredibly sort of neocon adventure. We're not at a high watermark. The base is with us, but we are seeing that the leadership, as soon as the base is distracted with something else, the leadership is not only willing but eager to go back to the swampy neocon foreign policy consensus. So I'm very worried about this. And I spent all day today just on this particular issue of like, how do we strategize to make sure that we can consolidate our gains, advance good people, etc. So I'm very sensitive to that. I mean, the leadership is awful. McConnell is awful. Thune is awful. Tillis is awful. We've got to be very, very careful, and we've got to use every lever of power. And the base is with us. I think ordinary people, vets and others, are concerned about engagement abroad because they think, look, we can't get baby formula. We can't get I think J.D. Vance, who's a friend, he's great. Trump couldn't get $4 billion over 4 years for a friggin' wall, and Biden in 1 week gets $40 billion for Ukraine. We can't get formula domestically, but they can get $40 billion. I mean, it's insane. So I think the base is with us. The American people are with us. The Republican leadership are not with us. And just kind of like, how do we finesse that? And I think a lot of people are aware of that. And the more tailwinds that we get from people, the better, because it helps give us strength. It helps scare the hell out of, people like McConnell and others. So, I'm generally optimistic because things move in cycles, and and generational cycles and other cycles. And I think things are moving in our direction, but it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to see the rise of people like JD Vance and Blake Masters and Joe Kent and the like. I still I'm far more pessimistic than you about the ability of that to move the machine, but the fact that these candidates are seeing the kind of support that they're seeing is good, and that they're embracing the rhetoric that they're embracing and the positions they're embracing, and they're not getting mowed down by the machine is a good sign. So
You don't realize how important they are. Like I'm not terribly optimistic. Maybe I'm talking more optimistic than I am, but I think people need to have that kind of rallying cry. But look, you get talk with people who know anything about House or Senate procedure. You get a small caucus and you can do very, very well. You get a small caucus in the House, 20 members or whatever, and you're good to go. Same with the Senate. You get 2 or 3, you get Masters, you get Vance, you've got Hawley, whatever, you're ready to rock and roll on some of this stuff. So, and what does that mean? That means you can hold up legislation. That means you can make demands on nominees, things like that. So I think we're in a reasonably good position. You don't need huge amounts of leverage because the American system is not fully majoritarian, which has its downsides, but there are still some sort of hyper formalist kind of symbolic positions that are taken in different places that allow for minority sort of control. And I think we're in a place where we have a small and concerted minority that's America first, and I think that'll continue to be very helpful.
Well, the other issue that I wanted to talk to you about was election integrity, because I know you've worked with that and you've been involved in litigation, that type of things with recounts. And I don't know how deep. It sounds like you've got a good bit of expertise there, but I was interested. We've had obviously a very contentious election here recently, presidential election. Lot of questions, a lot of people, wondering what's going on. It seems that it's pretty standard, no matter how much the Democrats want to, hem and haw about it. It's now become pretty standard practice to call into question the election of your opponent in pretty much every situation for both sides. No one really actually ever won their election. Everything, it's always some kind of Russian interference,
Right.
or someone wasn't born in the right place, or whatever it is. There's always some reason to doubt the legitimacy of your opponent's election. So I'll have a mechanical question, and then I'll have a question about general legitimacy. My mechanical question is this: I had Mark Hemingway on, and he and his wife wrote a very interesting book about.
I saw her this evening. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Well, yeah, they wrote a very interesting book, obviously, about the problems with the most recent presidential election. And even if you assume not the most dirty parts of of ballot delivery in the middle of the night or whatever, even if you're just talking about how the election was stacked against others, they pointed out that basically, Facebook and many of these other corporations and NGOs were able to more or less control the election offices of different states or counties or key regions. How does the GOP, the next Trump or DeSantis administration, how do they address that going forward? How do they deal with the fact that there's a very serious mechanical issue with
Yeah.
how local elections are being run, and how they can put the thumb on the scales at all different levels, the kind of the corporate and NGO complexes?
Right. So that's right down my strike zone. I was chief of staff to the Wisconsin election investigation under Michael Gableman, whom I hired into the last admin. So I helped run that, and I maintain good contact with Christina Bobb and other folks that are working for Trump right now on election issues. The recommendation I give to them I'll give to you, which is number one, we need an army of volunteers in every election. The consensus seems to be that the way that Youngkin won in Virginia was by flooding the zone with volunteers. When I was in Wisconsin in 2020, I had many people come up to me and say, we tried to sign up for the RNC, but they've turned us away. Or, the mayor said that they needed to get overtime for their staff, and their staff were going to handle the election stuff, so they turned us away. We were never contacted for actually being deployed. So a lot of grifters make a lot of money with these big lists of trying to get organized volunteers, but they never actually seal the deal and deploy them. So I've said, number one, get your deployment right. Make sure we have an army of volunteers, because the volunteers don't have to be particularly smart. I mean, it's great if they are, but at the end of the day, the mere fact of being on the field is enough to deter a lot of the problems. I mean, if you've got 10 grandmas, they're going to deter bad actors, even if the grandmas don't know much about the election law where they are. Part of this is an incentive problem. If you've got a little RNC volunteer who's got a $100,000 account, and he's based in Arlington, Virginia, and he's supposed to handle elections in Georgia, is he going to spend, $100 for 1,000 grandmas at $100 a day for election day review? Is he going to pay them $100 out of the RNC, 1,000 grandmas for eyes and ears? That takes a lot of work. Or is he going to get 2 big billboards at $50,000 a pop and call it a day? Because his job is to spend $100,000. Is he going to do it the hard way, which gets us a lot more eyes on the ground, or is he going to do it the easy way that gets him his job done in 15 minutes? Well, he's going to do the latter, and that's not acceptable. So the incentives are wrong. We need an army of volunteers. We need people reviewing the contracts. A lot of this is a job for the party, for the campaign, things like that. For individuals, I would say try to volunteer as much as you can at the grassroots level as election observers or as election officials, because, when I was volunteering, before I was on the Wisconsin election investigation itself for the Office of the Special Counsel, I was viewing the recount in Wisconsin and also the election day itself. And, the most helpful people that were the best were people that would say, I'm not a partisan Democrat. I'm here to do a good job. I volunteer. Maybe I'm even a Republican. Maybe I'm even a conservative or right wing or whatever. And they would know what the law is, and they do their job on their own. So people need to volunteer at the local level. My grandmother did that in Chicago for years. Just provide that force multiplier. That's kind of my biggest recommendation. There are tons of others on the law, changing the law, going back to paper ballots, providing election, post-election certification, various different kinds of remedies and things. There are all sorts of technical things, but I think the number one thing for people that listen to you or others is to volunteer and make sure that you actually learn what your local law is and then provide eyes and ears on the ground. Reagan did that, and he had a huge amount of highly motivated people. Some of it came out of the Goldwater movement, yaffers and whatever. But Trump needs that too. He didn't have it in 2016 or 2020. Some of them were turned away. Muscle your way in, volunteer, view it, spend the day, and just the mere fact of your presence, even if you don't know anything, the mere fact of your presence is helpful.
All right, so that's the nuts and bolts. Now let me ask you kind of the larger question. Like I said, we see this rise in questioning of legitimacy again on both sides, no matter how much they clutch their pearls on the left about questioning the sacredness of democracy. We see it very clearly with people like Stacey Abrams, who's actually been the governor of Georgia for who knows how long. In her mind, we see it very regularly that both sides are very willing. They play very fast and loose with questioning legitimacy of elections. As it becomes very clear that neither side is allowed to ever actually accept the legitimacy of a loss, and they're required almost in every election to call the legitimacy of their opponent's victory into question. What does the future of democracy look like? Because I think that there's a pretty deep sense in America
Yes.
that this is crucial, right? Like if there's one thing you can sell in America along with an AR-15 and apple pie, it's democracy. But it feels like if at every single turn the opposing teams have to question legitimacy of elections, then at some point we reach a breaking point. And at some level we saw this January 6th, right? You can't take people seriously who keep calling each other's elections illegitimate, who then in the next breath talk about the sacredness of democracy. If
Right.
people are following those orders and following that rhetoric, eventually they break that, and that seems to become a problem very quickly, especially for the right, who doesn't get to play the games the way the left does.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can't really answer that question. I'll just say, like, so Adrian Vermeulen, who was another appointee that I advanced along with myself to be appointed to ACUS, he notes, democracy, it's democratic when you get the right results. You look at Hungary or whatever. It's like, it's democratic, but if you get the wrong result, you got to revote. And that's kind of where we are. They think that, democracy is not a set of decision procedures. I mean, frankly, I think the integralist position is that there's no such thing as a pure set of decision procedures or procedure itself. Nothing is a second order problem, as my former professor, Ronald, and clerkship recommender Ronald Dworkin would say. Nothing is a second order problem. It's all first order. So, when we talk about democracy meaning a certain way of doing things, like, no. When we say democracy, we mean a certain set of actual outcomes. Who should get elected? If that person is not elected, it's not democratic. And if you see, the way the left operates, that's certainly what they do. If Trump looks like he's winning, that means it's not democratic by definition. So we are in that world. Does that mean that democracy is dead? I don't know the answer to that. It's a hard question. But I think in America we have a certain way of doing things. Historically we've had certain, my grandmother, other, sort of Tupperware party ladies that would run the county elections. They've done it for 50 years. They're nice ladies. You better do it this certain way. If you don't, they're going to throw your vote out. That's the way to do it. That's America. That's Iowa or wherever, different places where I've lived. And, that's important. If you throw that aside, if you look at like how we threw it aside in 2020, instead of grandma and the Tupperware party lady sort of running the elections, you had these thugs in Green Bay, for example. We had Ahmad Rivera Wagner. I mean, that is not a Wisconsin name. And we had Michael Spitzer Rubenstein. That is not a Wisconsin name. These people came in and they were thugs and they screamed at people and they were little assholes. We had people testify before the Wisconsin Assembly saying, my wife cried because you were screaming at her. And we were just voters or we were just observers. So, instead of having the way that grandma would run it, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's. You had these Democratic Party thugs, these Zuckerberg funded thugs come in, and it was awful. So, does that fact, is that consistent with our laws? I don't necessarily think that it is, but if it is consistent with our laws, does that mean the end of American democracy? I don't know the answer to that. I think we need to fight at every level, basically. And I think a lot of people are trying to fight at every level.
All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here. I've got a few super chats. Hopefully, we can answer real quick before we go. Guys, if you aren't following Andrew on Twitter, I've got his link below. And Andrew, before we get into the super chats here, is there anything else beyond your Twitter that you wanted to plug? Anything you're working on that you want people to check out?
No, I mean, no. I'm just happy to hear to talk with you about kind of, my experience in the Trump admin and kind of how things are being planned for the next go around, because I'm still very deeply connected to, different groups in the campaign itself.
Absolutely. Well, let's see what some of the questions people have here. Let's see. Samuel Spiel for $10. Thank you very much. The right doesn't have the balls to fight big business. Big business supports cultural leftism because it breaks up the working class. the problems in the US are very severe. Well, yeah, Samuel, I think a lot of people recognize that problem. The good news is we do see some change of that. Of course, DeSantis is famously attacking Disney. Just had, I believe, the Buccaneers. Uh, uh, I think he's either set to or has already rejected some modification or change to their stadium due to their stance on I think it was gun control. So there are some promising people who recognize this problem, but there is certainly still a very serious issue with what kind of passes for the right in the United States and kind of its love affair with big business. And I think a lot of that wrapped up in that mantra of, they're the party of opportunity and therefore, big business is on their side. I think that's a narrative that worked for a long time, but I think more and more people are seeing through that. What do you think, Andrew? Addressing big business, is that something that the new right is able to do?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, but I think it's something that we're aware of. Um, a couple different terms. I mean, horseshoe theory or red brownism or whatever. I think that was right down the strike zone of what Trump was trying to do in 2016. I think we failed at it for the same reason we failed at a number of things, but I hope that it's sort of on order in 2024 if he runs. I mean, a number of people that I advanced were right down the strike zone. When I was at the Scalia Law School, I commissioned a paper by Adam Candu, who we then hired into NTIA under the Trump admin when I was there, and who is now writing different things on the Section 230 issue. Nate Symington I interviewed, and he's now at the FCC. There are a lot of different people. We tried to make a conscious effort. I mean, I re-interviewed, Rohit Chopra at the FTC. So I think at the very end, under McIntyre and at Trump's behest, I mean, we were trying to explore ways to have a more robust domestic industrial policy. I certainly hope that we can do that, in the next go round. Look, I've been on this beat for a while. I mean, even before Trump, I've been talking to Federalist Society chapters for years. And one of the things I like to say is, like, look, corporations are public entities. They are chartered. If you go back historically, the East India, Trading Company or whatever, they're chartered by the sovereign. I mean, even in America, I do this all the time in my day job now. I deal with nonprofits and sort of right-wing candidates. You've got to file articles of incorporation. You ask the sovereign to recognize your corporate entity. A corporation is a public thing. It's not a private thing. It's a public thing. And we need to recognize that. If you look at the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, they have ability to create conditions on the charters of banks and bank holding companies. And, in other words, at the end of the day, business is subject, and the conditions for business are subject to political control. And it's kind of a libertarian brainworm to say that there's no role for the people to decide what corporations do. I think there's recognition of that. I think under the big tech issue, we use a lot of different words, First Amendment or free speech or, censorship or whatever. But really what we're saying is these are companies that set the public square in America, and collectively we have control over this. So let us do that. And I think DeSantis is great. His chief counsel is another one of my guys, Ryan Newman. He's great. He was, you can look this up. He was nominated to be general counsel of the Army, but got dinged by McCain for being too based, basically. So I think DeSantis has got good staff too. You've got a lot of great people out there. Many people working on these tech issues. Rachel Bovard at CPI, a lot of people. And I'm optimistic. I think we just need to recognize we just have decades of people saying, corporations, we should be hands off. And I think that's just silly.
No, I think that's definitely the right stance to take towards corporations, the right understanding, and I'm glad to hear that that's the case, or is at least a growing opinion. Pete Budapest 99, and actually another great question. Pete's lining up some good ones today. Suppose the right wing does successfully capture the civil service. Is that sufficient to outflank the other consensus-making institutions, mainly mass media and academia. I think that's really great, Pete, because obviously we know a lot of the bureaucrats will be heavily influenced from those two institutions. So can you I think maybe the precursor is that is, can you even turn the civil service around without turning those other two institutions around? Or if you can capture civil service, can those two institutions be downstream from the civil service?
Yeah, I don't entirely know the answer to that. I think so. I mean, I ended as the acting GC at USOPM. I worked on the Schedule F, issue and all sorts of Title V issues, Title V dealing with the management of the civil service. I think a concerted political effort can take control of the civil service per se, but again, you need a pipeline, you need a lot of replacements, you're going to get a lot of flack for it. There's going to be incredible leaks and compromise and all sorts of stuff on everybody up and down the chain because it's just awful. So, I think that the proper response is more salami slicing than a frontal assault, although nobody wants a frontal assault more than me. In terms of does that win on the other two elements of the cathedral, to borrow a phrase, it's one of them, but they're all incredibly difficult. And I think the biggest issue that I keep talking about, and I do have a Substack that I really should write more for, but it's kind of directed at what I think the lever is, which is our small princes across the country, whether it's, Uline or Tire Rack or whatever, these people who are wealthy within their communities that are donors that often are sort of instinctually libertarian and small brain on politics. Those are kind of the lever. Like these are people who should be buying local newspapers and subsidizing them and understanding that they're going to lose money. These are people who should be subsidizing and buying small colleges and understanding that they're losing money. Like him or not, he made mistakes certainly with Ave Maria, but Moynihan had the right idea, and I think Bush kind of sort of has the right idea on some issues as well. So I think there's definitely those are the kind of classic three things that need to be targeted. Winning one doesn't mean you win the others. The thing that can help us the most on winning any and all of the above is having sort of altruistic local lords who who are able to fund and subsidize and just help engage in the asymmetric warfare that needs to be engaged in.
Yeah, you really do. The right desperately needs people willing to make financial investments and sacrifices. That's really just the long and short of it on a lot of fronts. Bolero 393, please clap. Yes, of course, Jeb. My favorite Jeb meme is of course it's all coming up Jeb and him doing the laugh. With the it's all yellow. That's still my favorite one here. Let's see. Son of a Glitch for $10. Thank you very much. The organization to build is one that promotes family assistance in local communities. Every member trained in esoteric Yarvanism and a trade skill to be called the qualified reservationists. Very, very good. Yes, that's. I definitely enjoy that name. Well done. Let's see.
He has great hair.
It's hard to argue. It's hard to argue that Curtis isn't winning the hair game. Let's see here. Quartz ZZ7 for $10 Canadian. You don't need smart volunteers. Keep them dumb and loyal. We need to use midwits to our advantage. Well, midwits aren't dumb. Okay, we need to I'm sorry, but I'm gonna get very pedantic about midwittery. Okay, which is midwittery itself. Midwits are not dumb. They're not dumb people. They're smart people. They're just slightly smarter than the average person, and that makes them overcompensate. It's an important distinction. All right, guys, I think we made it through all of our super chats. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to thank a few people personally. Of course, Easter Worshipper, AWXYZ, Santa9901, Nurkish, and user EO425302. I know that's a computer generated one, but I'm going to keep thanking you for that. Everyone who donates through the Subscribe Star, thank you so much. It helps to keep me putting out content on the channel. And of course, I want to thank Andrew Kloster. I think this has been a really interesting. Again, we talk a lot about theory. It's easy to to snipe from the bleachers, but it's good to hear that there are people on the ground in the thick of things who understand some of the basic problems that are going on. It's all very complicated issues. None of this is easy stuff. These are all really hard fought battles, and so glad to hear kind of your perspective from someone who's in the trenches.
And thanks for having me. I'm sorry again for the quality of the sound and everything. Perhaps at some point we can do this again, and I can be a little more buttoned down.
No problem. Like I said, I know you're getting things done, and that's why you had to kind of jump in when you could. And I appreciate, at least we didn't have to reschedule this. Everybody was still able to hear everything. Sound quality, whatever. It's YouTube. People will survive. All right. So thank you guys for joining us once again, and as always, I'll talk to you next time.